Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of me reading some of my favorite stories. Today, we're going to be reading from the book Dead Bait, which is an anthology of horror films with a special added ingredient. For each of these stories, draw on horror, humor, with a helping of dark fantasy and a touch of deviance. These 19 contemporary stories pay homage to the monsters that lurk in the murky waters of our imaginations. Today we are reading The Test Drive by Mike Norris. Pekka had some bitch. Gale squashed the creepy crawly with a swat of his broad palms, spurting bug mustard into the rolls of his corrugated neck. Peeling the battered insect off his skin, Gale dangled the carcass up into the sunlight for a proper examination. Translucent as a scrap of onion skin, the spring-tailed little bugger clasped its wings perpendicular to its body like a lacy sail. Peckerhead's some bitch tried to bite the hell out of me. Oh, he wouldn't hurt nobody, Maxwell drawled, fanning himself with a rumpled magazine. He just buzzed up out of Dwarf Lake, looking for a healthy mate. I guess he seen you and thought you looked pretty healthy. That's some kind of fat joke. Gale eyed his lanky co-worker with a twinge of suspicion tilled into his brow. Look at the size of this damn skeeter. Tell me he wasn't gonna suck me dry. That ain't no skeeter, Gale. It's just an old mayfly. Maxwell rose from the bench to pluck an identical insect from the porch rail of Eamon Otto's, where the bugs clung in shivering droves. An avid fly fisherman, Maxwell fancied himself the resident expert on aquatic bugs, and for that matter on just about everything else. Yes, sir, this here's a fine time of year to be a fisherman or even a fish. You see, most water bugs live down on the muddy pond, bottom right up to the very end of their lives, but then they crawl out to do their mating business on land. Once they finish up romancing, they all fly right back into the water to dump off their eggs, but what's feeding for them once they get home is nothing but a fish-feeding frenzy. Well, Gale flicked his mangled specimen over the rail. Messing with the wrong broads will get you in trouble every time, won't it now? I'd reckon, Maxwell snorted. Gale and Maxwell started out over their used car lot. Heat waves shivered over the doomed backs of 30-some automobiles, lazing in the sun like a herd of benign beasts. How long had it been since they sold one? 2 weeks? A week and a half, at least? Nobody was buying anything lately. It was too goddamned hot to spend money. A blue-haired old woman had been shuffling aimlessly between rows of scalding vehicles for nearly half an hour. She paused beside a cutlass and glanced pleadingly up to the salesman, parked comfortably on their porch. Well, ain't you gonna get up and greet her? Gale jostled Maxwell with a dimpled elbow. Why don't you get up, you lazy bastard? Max whined. Me, hell, I'm waiting for a challenge. A broad smile split Gale's face like an overripe tomato. A challenge, huh? Max leaned back in his seat. Well, I got one for you. We got to sell 3 cars by 5 o'clock. Whoever comes up short buys wings and pitchers tonight, and whoever wins, Maxwell made a casting and a winding gesture with his hands, gets to take tomorrow off to do a little fishing. Gale hitched his eyebrows. Wings and beer. To hell with a goddamn day of fishing, but those eats sound pretty damn good. He agreed to Maxwell's terms with an obligatory handshake. Dibs on Grandma. Max leapt up and trotted down the steps toward his victim. You dirty bastard, Gale muttered. Christ almighty, it was hot, and that dank, fishy smell so redolent in the air it didn't make sitting outdoors any more enjoyable. Gale waddled down the length of the porch to gaze painfully across the verdant bean fields. A dark stand of cottonwoods on the eastern border betrayed by the secluded body of water tucked just beyond the tree line. Tagged a decade earlier, the little lake got its name when Dwarf Chemical was indicted for making midnight runs to that location to dump their toxic byproducts. Occasionally, a massive irrigation would roll the surface of Dwarf Lake as those corroding drums and cylinders that had ever been recovered would detonate far below, releasing God knows what into the environment. It went without saying that the locals never fished there. Gale? The robotic voice of Curtis Keene piped through the external intercom system. Got one on front, if you want him. Hell yeah, I want that son bitch, Gale murmured, ambling back around front, mopping his brow with a white handkerchief. One look at his customer, and his heart nearly threw a rod. Jesus, Harold Christ, you scared me, son. Gale recomposed himself, offering a reluctant paw to the vapid-eyed teenager who teetered on the balls of his feet in a puddle of murky water. The kid was soaked to the bone, and his bleached, wrinkled hide suggested an extended period of immersion. Boy, did he ever stink! Like putrefied seafood, a greenish sort of spoil, cocked dog-like to one side. His malformed head was ensnarled, an old fishing line. Say, you ain't been fishing back there, have you? Gale dabbed at his face, with his hanky covering his nostrils. Don't go eating anything you happen to catch back in there. Water's awful polluted. The kid did not respond. So are we looking, buying, or replacing today? The salesman clapped a friendly hand on the kid's shoulder with a wet smack, rotating him back around toward the car lot. Gale quickly averted his eyes upon noticing the kid's bare butt glistening through a tattered aperture on the back side of his breeches. Looked as though he might have snagged a flag of denim on a barbed wire fence somewhere. Across the lot, Grandma was shaking hands with Gale's co-worker. Then together they shuffled back toward the office to start the paperwork. Unbelievable, Maxwell furtively flicked his index finger and drew an imaginary point in the air, winking slyly over the top of Grandma's head. Gale responded with an extended middle finger. What'd you say your name was, son? Gale paused to flick several mayflies off the kid's soaked sweatshirt. Sorry about all the goddamn bugs. They blow in from the lake, I guess. Maxwell is fisherman. He could tell you more about it than I could. The kid halted before a forest green jaguar, gaping mindlessly down at its hood. His skin was so loose, so colorless. Was he some sort of a burn victim? What exactly was wrong with him? Gale prodded the conversation back into motion, fighting the powerful urge to gawk at the strangest customer he'd ever seen. She's a peach, but more than a little out of the price range of most folks. How much was you looking to spend roundabouts? As if some remote facet of the kid's psyche suddenly realized that it was being addressed, he turned with a detectable element of uncertainty to disarm Gale with a cold stare through those awful milky eyes. Was he blind? Surely not. He'd made it up onto the lot without the aid of a dog or a cane. Perhaps he was visually impaired in some way. The kid emitted a laborious gurgle. A black-watered beetle squirmed from between his ragged lips and dropped to the pavement. I think we maybe ought to go around back and have a look at a little better fit for you. I can get you into a great ride today for just pennies on the dollar. Now, she's a four-banger, but that's an awful important consideration. Gas prices as high as they are these days. Gale directed his reeling customer to the rear service garage, halting him before an old Mustang hatchback. In the early 80s, the paint might have been cherry red, but after so many seasons under the sun, the color had oxidized to the hue of an underripe tomato. Now let me show you something. Gale opened the driver's side door and stroked the inside of the door jamb with the tip of his pudgy index finger. No ridges. Check all the jambs and you'll find the same thing. Right there. That'll tell you she's never been wrecked and repainted. See what I mean? Without missing a beat, Gale popped the hood and led the boy around the front of the vehicle, where he promptly removed the air filter, holding it aloft for the boy's examination. We maintain every car that rolls onto this lot, and as if she was our own. New oil, Gale withdrew a dripstick stick. New tranny fluid, withdrawing another. New brake pads all around, kicking a tire. New wiper blades. Hell, I'd take her home myself if my daughter wasn't all growed up already. This car's ready to roll, and if you'll do business with me today, I'll even throw in your first oil change for free. The kid gaped through the riot of fishing line. An olive snail oozed up the cusp of his chin, weaving through muddy rivulets that wept from both his nostrils. No response. The only sound was the hot wind through the beans and the chorus of churning insects in the distant cottonwoods. Want to feel her out? Gale coaxed the kid into the driver's seat. Once he'd situated his customer, he slammed the door as if he'd trapped a rat and hustled around to the passenger side. Let's take her out for a quick spin, Gale suggested, dumping himself in the seat with a stifled grunt. The car listed starboard on squealing shocks. Go ahead and start her up. Fumbling for an elusive seatbelt, Gale glanced over at his customer, who hadn't moved a muscle. You with me, son? I said start her up. Nothing. Nothing at all. Shaking his head, Gale reached over and cranked her up himself. The alternator screamed like a banshee. Gripping the T-bone automatic shift, Gale clunked the transmission down into the gear. Now just press the dadgum gas pedal. Without touching the wheel, the kid stomped the accelerator all the way to the floorboard, launching the vehicle headlong into the beans. Christ all freaking mighty! The Mustang was off, tearing through the crop like a farm implement gone haywire. Bean pods, leaves, and lime green katydids bombarded the windshield, spattering the glass with their respective juices. Blasting across the field and out of the far side, the vehicle barreled into the willows, right for Dwarf Lake. Stop! Stop! Gale begged, as if to mock his pleas. The Mustang slammed into the trunk of an old cottonwood. The windshield detonated into a billion chiseled diamonds. A tranquil shower of cottonwood leaves rained down into their laps from above. Get out from behind that wheel, Gale ordered, hauling himself out into the rough. Circling the ruined car, he opened the driver's door and dragged the boy out onto his feet. Gale stared at his mesmerized customer, who appeared to be entranced by the love-strict drone of the gossamer katydids, all rasping their summer serenade through the beans. The kid's lip parted with a hiss of gas. Over the hump of his tongue, a darting antenna flickered anxiously back and forth. Gale took 2 steps back. The horrified feeler stroked the edge of the boy's teeth. You got something there in your... Gale gestured toward his own lips, but he was distracted by something churning in the kid's throat, stretching the skin and behind those marbled eyes, something was alive in there. He could see the dark, cemented thing writhing around back there in the kid's sockets, causing his eyeballs to bulge and recede. What in the Sam hell's wrong with you? Gale's puzzlement gaze traveled over the boy's distended abdomen, where a gentle bulge protruded outward, tinting the colorless skin. A gaseous release of eternal pressure fizzed through the boy's navel, dripping globules of banana froth onto the tips of his sneakers. You got to get to a doctor, son. Gale lowered his voice. And you're really going to need a real good, reliable vehicle now more than ever to get back and forth for all your medical care. Gale checked his watch. 4:17. If he could get back to the lot, there still might be time to win the bet. But he had to settle up with Fishboy first. Mayflies drifted between them like cotton in the wind. One crawled onto Gale's throat. He slapped at the squirming thing, mashing its guts between his wrinkled digits. How much money you got on you? Gale glowered into the dead boy's eyes. Seriously, I'm willing to cut you a deal here. All under the counter, you see. Cautiously, Gale reached behind the kid and extracted his wallet, grimacing when his fingers stroked a clammy buttock. He'd forgotten about the hole back there. The wallet popped free and pissed a stream onto the ground. Without breaking eye contact, Gale spread the ruined leather to extract a surprisingly substantial stack of bills. 20, 40, 60, 260, sold at $267. Now, I might need to call yourself a tow truck, but I think she'll do nicely. I'd shake your hand, son, but I guess you know how it is. Gale tucked the wet roll of bills into his shirt pocket and let the boy's empty wallet fall to the dirt with a wet slap. Now then, you get the fuck on out of here, and if you ever set foot on my lot again, you'll be talking to the cops. Gale turned to walk away, and then the freak attacked. Arms like iron rebar twisted around Gale's torso, interlocking across his chest. The thing's strength was inhuman. Gale had no breath to scream as he heard his ribs crack. The ineffable stench behind him was a beachcomber's nightmare, and Gale could feel his cold, fishy lips against the back of his neck. Just take the money. Gale toppled forward into the weeds with the thing lashed onto his back, but the abomination made no attempt to retrieve its wet wad of cash. No. Something else was on its mind. The creature's intentions were becoming alarmingly clear as its torso began to seize rhythmically in very purposeful pelvic thrusts. Gale felt the throbbing cap of some sort of prong nosing deeper into the cleft of his rump. He tried to squirm loose of its wet embrace, but his struggling only seemed to arouse the goddamn thing. Its fingertips clawed into his chest. With a terrifying pop, the monster's organ, or whatever it was, burst through the seam of Gale's khakis and plunged right through the knotted eye of his backside. Releasing a girlish squeal, Gale palpitated as the donkey-sized proboscis inched deeper and deeper into his colon, anchoring itself with successful collars of spine until it gorged him to the tearing port. Oh, Lord, what's happening back in there? It dabbed and probed, exploring the inner walls of his cavity with what felt like a spear-tipped yam. And when it dumped its chilly payload inside of him, Gale's agonized howl erupted through the cottonwood canopy to mingle with the chorus of mating insects. Here's to you, finally sold the Rustang. Maxwell licked the ochre wing sauce off his lips and hoisted his mug up to the bar, but Gale failed to meet him with a toast. Hey now, if you'd won today, I shouldn't have bitched a lick. What's your problem anyway? Still crying over falling to the dwarf lake? Man, I wish I could have seen that. I'm sure gonna be thinking about you tomorrow when I'm out there in the boat all day. I promise, I won't laugh. No, I just don't feel so awful good. Gale sagged over the bar, his heavy body drenched in cold sweat. After the unspeakable incident back there in the willow patch, he'd have certainly rather gone on home after work to enjoy the meager cleansing of a hot shower. But Maxwell wouldn't have stood for it. He'd won their bet, and Gale knew how insistent he'd be about claiming his prize. So he washed off in the lake as best as he could and untucked his shirt tail to conceal the bloody hole in the back of his breeches. He'd be damned if Maxwell ever found out what really happened. He'd never hear the end of it. Whatever that monster had dumped in his rump was feeling a little funny back there, kind of fluttered sometimes, like a weird stream of little bubbles deep inside his guts. The hot wings and beer weren't sitting well tonight. It was human, Gale muttered. Just a damned burn victim escaped from some loony bin. But that god-awful appendage, Gale recalled with a shudder. It felt like a pythonic earthworm, all snorting around back there in his pooper. I'm thirsty, Gale croaked, mopping up his brew. Well, shut up and drink your beer, then. No, I need some water. Gale wailed feverishly at their waitress, but she was preoccupied with another table. I need some water now. Gale lurched off his bar stool, leaving a ring of gore onto the seat. Maxwell stood in mildew, pointing his gnawed drumstick at the bloody puddle. You all right, Gale? No. Gale hobbled the length of the bar to the service prep station where he snatched up 2 pitchers, tilted back his head, and dumped them both into his quivering maw. Half the light beer spilled down his chest. God damn, it was hot. Gale seized a pitcher of sweet tea, poured it directly over the top of his head, attracting more than a little attention from the waitstaff and patrons. He don't feel well, he said, Maxwell explained to a mystified barkeep. I guess he's awful bot. Got a bad wing, maybe. Gale plodded across the dining area, exuding a trail of droplets from his rump, snatching glasses off random tables and dumping the contents over his head. Plowing through the front doors, Gale lumbered into the night. Lord, it was hot. He'd barely made it out of the bar before his t-shirt fell to the moonlit pavement. Ambling back towards Amon Auto, he unfastened his belt and shook loose his ruined pants. Gale didn't really know where he was headed, and he didn't care, because he was no longer in control of his decisions. Another presence had gone, switched all things around inside his head, allowing Gale to focus on more meaningful things, like cold bathtubs of water, deep blue oceans, and murmuring mountain streams. Boy, did he ever yearn for water's cool caress to soothe his crawling skin. Maybe he'd go for a midnight swim at a nearby lake, have himself a skinny dip, just like he used to go back when he was a kid. Yes, sir, a moonlight swim. Maybe he'd go ahead and kick his way on down to the bottom there, and those inky depths just wriggle all around in that nice cold mud. And he didn't figure he'd be alone down there. Gale wasn't sure how he figured this, he just did. There'd be others down there with the same pearly eyes, and they'd be undulating around down there in that tumulus of corroded chemical drums, finding good spots to deposit their mounds of eggs. And by the next summer, when the hot winds started hissing through the beans, and the fish were all in a frenzy, popping mayflies off the surface, then he'd know it was that time of year again, and his cycle would begin anew. That one was a bit scary and a bit gross, but why not? For that is what the Mortician likes, a dabbing of gore, a little bit of uncomfortableness, and of course, horror. That again was The Test Drive, written by Mike Norris from the book Dead Fate. I truly hope you have enjoyed this. I enjoy reading these stories for you. I am having a wonderful time, but for now, that's all we have the time for. This is the Mortician wishing you a good night and pleasant dreams.